Here we are. I think for you guys, it's 3 months later. I've not done any work on the bike in... Well, that's not true. Anyway, welcome to episode 11, I think. Last one was about fuel and compression. This one is about spark. It's got mad potential to be a long one because I have had to learn so many things. Big shout out to everyone that left comments like with ideas about what was wrong with the bike before. It wasn't just one thing, it's multiple things. Let's get into it. Hopefully the wind isn't going to screw this up because it's the tail end of Storm Eunice, I think. Right, fuel, compression, spark. Or simple, simpler, and somewhat nuanced, right? So these are the three umbrellas of things that everyone says you've got to look into when trying to figure out why your bike won't start. Spark is quite an interesting thing to get into. If you think of it as like an umbrella of things to research, there are so many things that can inhibit spark. Not so much on a carbureted bike because of, you know, it's carbureted for the most part. It's almost... Anyway, but on a fuel-injected bike, the ECU has to communicate with so many things. Like, so if you think of the ECU as basically it's a calculator. So like it receives information from a multitude of different components and it calculates what to do, basically. Let's go with the simple things first. Right off the bat, I replaced the spark plug, the spark cap, the spark lead, the HT lead. I tested the pulsar coil, and that is reading, I think, if I off the top of my head, it's been like 5 months. So 13.2 kilo ohms on both points to the end of the HT lead. So that is bang on where it is supposed to be. What else? That's like the most obvious things that you check. Then you've got other things like a pulse generator coil. So that is the little magnet. So when your reluctor coil, which is on this bike, is connected to the stator rotor. As that spins, there's like a big knob, which goes around. When it goes past a certain point, it basically generates a slight magnetic field, which generates a little electrical current, which goes through to the ECU and tells it that it is in a certain position. I replaced that. What else have we got? Let me show you. I'll show you. On the throttle body, you've got the A-pad, the accelerator position sensor thing, the FAD, that's the throttle position, one or the other. There's the FAD and the A-pad. I've replaced these. There's the Manifold air pressure sensor, and that measures the pressure of the, you know, the air going through here. I've replaced that. So we're talking like 125 quid, 125 quid, 130 quid. There is an ambient air pressure sensor behind the headlight, which is 130 quid. I've replaced that as well because I did find that much as the one behind the headlight was fine, it turned out. It was only slightly out of spec when I was using it, when I was checking its resistance in ohms and stuff. But the manifold air pressure one, I mean, all this stuff that I've covered in a thread on ADV Rider. So I don't want to necessarily bore everyone to tears. Plus I had an SSD failure, which meant that I lost everything, as you all know in the previous video. The manifold air pressure sensor, this little thing here, it's like got a little diaphragm in it. And I think what happened is over time that diaphragm had gone hard. So at idle, this little thing should be reading about 1.2-ish volts, and at full tilt it should read about 4.5 volts. Now I was finding when I was forcing the bike to start, which it wouldn't idle, which I'll get onto, which where it gets really technical. When I was forcing the bike to start, no matter how many revs I was at, or RPMs, I was reading a steady 2.9. It wouldn't shift either way. So that's how I knew that one had to go. That took bloody ages to figure out. But how did I come to all of this? So let's really get into it. So, in short, I noticed that really hard to get the bike to start. I mean, I'm not going to show you again now. I'm just going to try and get it fixed. So I was finding that I was turning it over and turning it over and turning it over, and it wouldn't catch. But if I added about 40% worth of throttle, it would come to life. And it would splutter a bit, it would be a bit smoky and whatever, and it smelled like a lot of unburnt fuel. But suddenly, it came to life, and eventually it would level out, and I could just about keep it at about 40% throttle. So it would hover around 4,000 RPMs, and I could keep it going. But if I let the throttle close, gone. So in Tune ECU, forgive me, this is going to be possibly really confusing. In Tune ECU, you've got the FL switch, which looks like this, and this controls when your bike goes from the fuel map to the load map, right? So that's when it goes between basically what you're deciding is the throttle input versus what the ECU thinks is more appropriate based on air pressure kind of thing, which is much better for the low speed control. Some people edit their maps so it reads 10% throttle, and then zeros across the board, which basically means that at the bottom end you get a little bit of slow control stuff, but after that it's all up to you, and people quite like that because obviously it's laggy bike. But what I eventually figured out is that if I adjusted the FL map, and believe me, I've tried hundreds of maps, I've created so many different versions. If I created custom FL switch maps, I noticed that with the spark plug out and grounded, if I try and start the bike with, let's say I do a map which has got a switch over at 10% throttle, I found that I was getting spark at 10% throttle, but below that, nothing. Therefore, the bike won't idle. If I put the FL switch numbers to 30% throttle, I was finding I was getting spark outside of that 30%. So above 30% throttle, it was sparking. Ergo, it comes to life. Sorry if this is really confusing, and it's taken months and months and months of just nearly been reduced to tears. Which kind of led me to believe this is where I need to be looking at the ECU. Something is telling the ECU to inhibit the spark below or in anything that is controlled by the L map. So I switched out the ECU, I bought EFI and EP, so the throttle and the fuel injection ECUs. Cost a lot of money. And no difference. Basically replaced everything. All the wires that lead to the ECU, I've probed them at both ends of the wires. Everywhere they go on the bike, I have put a little thing in them and I've probed them and I've checked the continuity, the resistance. I've learned so much. It's been a real nightmare. But I think we figured it out. Here's what I found out. The manifold air pressure, which would have been sending a dodgy signal to the ECU, would have been one cause of not wanting to idle. Replaced it. A little bit better. Switching the ECUs did seem to increase the brightness of the spark somehow. I don't see why or how. New battery, again. Basically, I replaced all the sensors one by one. So it's got all new sensors all around. All of these things it just kept on sounding like it was a little bit closer, but there was just always just no spark in the idle range. Just driving me absolutely. In the end, after posting endlessly on ADV Rider on multiple different threads and different forums, and thanks so much to everyone that got involved and tried to help out here, but I ended up giving in and taking it to KTM Tech, and plugged it in, and the first thing that flagged up, the very first thing that flagged up. Right, in here is the throttle body motor drive, right? This is actually, for the most part, what controls your throttle opening. You think it's you, but actually it's this for the most part. You got these cables which kind of can open and close it, so there's the butterfly in there. I'm just going to be really honest because I've tried to be really honest throughout all of this. When I was putting the bike back together, plugged everything all in, and I wanted to check this thing here, the A-pad and the FAD were reading at 0.72 millivolts. When you do that, when you do all of your checks, you're meant to unplug this here. This is the power to the motor drive. When your bike is turned on, the motor drive is very minutely controlling this here. When you first turn the bike on, if you've got it all unplugged, you'll see that this, just briefly, when you turn the key, it does that, and you can see that you can just push it in a little bit. When this is plugged in, if you were to push this, just that tiny little bit there, as much as when it's unplugged, it just feels like it's spring resistant, but when it's plugged in, it's motor and spring resistance. When I pressed it, just briefly, forgetting to unplug that, it went and made a really quite strange sound. That is literally the only thing that I have done which I shouldn't have done, as far as I can tell, regarding the throttle body. I don't know why the air pressure sensor died. I don't know why all the other things slightly died. They're just really old, I suppose. But that's the only thing I've done which I can think of which could have caused motor drive error. There's no FI code that comes up on the bike, so there's no error message for this. If your volt level or millivolt levels are different or too different from this side to that side, they're supposed to be read about the same amount when it's kind of just standing. If they're too different, you get things like implausible throttle position. There's lots of different ways of it saying that they're not correctly aligned, and you might want to check it, and potentially the gears that are hidden behind here are damaged. And so every time I was powering up the bike, I was seeing it do the right thing. It was going, click, click like that. I was getting no FI warning code, so I was continually assuming that there was nothing wrong with the throttle body, when in fact, the first thing that popped up when we took it to the KTM Tech was that there's a motor drive error. We unplugged it, we cleared the cache and everything, fired it up again, turned on the bike. First thing that pops up, motor drive error. Turned it off. We did it about 30 times. The guy was getting really bored with me. Wouldn't let me film. They didn't seem up for that at all. Basically, the reason it's taken so long is because I basically spanked my budget for this bike on just things that I didn't really need. So when it came to needing a new throttle body, I'd already spent 700 quid on all the bits that connect to the throttle body, even though if you buy the throttle body with all the bits connected to it, it's 630 quid. But I didn't want to spend 630 quid, so one by one, I replaced all the little bits. Once you fit them, you can't send them back. So I basically just hit a wall. But now I've got a throttle body. So I'm gonna fit it, I'm gonna put it on, and then I'm gonna take it back to KTM. We're gonna plug it in, and we're gonna see if it throws up any error messages, because I'm not up for mucking about anymore. I'd rather just spend 100 quid on getting them to pick it up, take it to their workshop, plug it in, and tell me if any poor readings. I will check to make sure that, you know, this is reading the correct amount of millivolts, but beyond that, let's get it fitted. Come on. That one. Unplug that one before you touch in there. So here it is. This is my unmolested second-hand 2008 throttle body. Now, I'm not sure if I made this clear enough in the other video. I would have bought a whole new throttle body, but the new throttle body comes with all of this stuff attached to it. Literally all of this whole setup comes attached to it. So over the course of trying to repair the bike, I replaced these, replaced the fuel injector, I replaced this. Obviously I've got different fuel hose, and I replaced the manifold air pressure sensor. And all the components that I replaced came to more than the value of a new throttle body. But I didn't realise that I was going to be finding an error code that wasn't going to show up on the FI code list. So I went with a second-hand one, and I went with this one because the guy assures me it came from a fully running bike, and you can see that all of the bolts and whatnot have still got their original markings that show that it's not been molested, it's not been played with, it's not been opened up. If it was from a running bike, then theoretically it should all be good. And it's cheaper for me to buy a second-hand one, test it all out myself, check there's no FI codes, and then take it to KTM Tech and get them to double check. And by the time I've got it back from the dealership, it's still way cheaper than buying a whole new throttle body. But we'll see. Maybe it's a bit like Pod Racer, where you make the mistake of buying, you know, second-hand parts, and then your pod can never reach its true potential. That may be the case. I might end up buying a whole new throttle body, but at least with this, I've got spares of everything apart from the throttle body itself. So I've got spares of, you know, the A-pad and the FAD and the manifold air pressure sensor and everything. I mean, arguably, I might even have a spare motor drive. I think maybe with this one going on, I could open up the other one and just have a look and see if I can find what was wrong with it inside. Probably should have done that in the first place, but I was so dejected that I just kind of abandoned the project for a bit. Anyway, let's get it on. Right, throttle body is reconnected. Let's see if it works. Well, let's see what readings we get first. I just fired up Tune ECU with the motor drive disconnected. Both the A-pad and the FAD are within the 0.7 to 0.74 millivolt tolerance range. And with it plugged in, there's no FI warning codes. I feel really sick. Could this be it? Motor drive error. Yes. Right, I'm by no means in a position to blip the throttle, anything like that. I can't ride it yet. I've still got to let the coolant flow through the system, and to do that I've got to do all the resets. I've got to run the engine for 15 minutes without touching the throttle from cold. So I'm gonna give it half an hour just to cool down just from that 30 seconds, a minute long of running. Oh my God. Like and subscribe. This is it. This from here, like hopefully next time you see me, I'm riding in some way or another. Ooh.